Hi, my name is Benedict. This is one of a series of videos that I admit I have made all over the place, not in perfect numbered order. I guess I've just made them as it's come up to me. They are based around the 4 pillars of success, which we'll go over in a moment. This video is about specialization. It is what professionals do, and I mean real professionals, as in people who earn a living. The greatest example generally being the Nashville method. The reality is that in the successful music world, people specialize. And yet in Dorville, it says that we shouldn't. It's even got to the point where we're discouraged from specializing. And we're taught that we have to DIY everything, do it yourself. The reality, though, that where they're pushing this DIY mentality, and it's not the same DIY as punk. Punk said, screw you, we are going to do it ourselves. The Sex Pistols, or Malcolm McLaren, said, okay, we're not going to play the same set of rules, we're just going to make up our own rules and we're going to do our stuff. And so many of the acts around that time were doing exactly that. They were finding their own formula for their own special thing. And that wasn't just weird, obscure acts that nobody's ever heard of. It went right the way through pop acts, Kim Wilde, Thompson Twins, acts like that, that people pass off as being trivial and pop and therefore not worth a second. Flock of Seagulls. And yet those were acts who were doing something that was unique, something that was very much theirs, and they were doing it their way. Of course, Boy George is in many ways a poster child for that, because he broke so many conventions in how he did his thing. And, of course, he absolutely won for that. Obviously, we need to walk a line where what we do works for enough people, but it also has to be strong enough to stand and say, hey, this is different. So Dorville says, you've got to do it all yourself. I understand why they've come to that conclusion, but really what they're saying is not DIY in that punk sense. They're saying do it alone. Dorville actually wants to break people apart, because the reality is when people work together, they end up with amazing things, but they actually don't need as many plugins. But when you split people apart so that they're all doing it alone and fractured, you can sell them more garbage. And literally it is garbage. You want the background on that? I've written a lot about it on my site, Garbage Gods, and also just the recent video about Dorville being a toxic religious cult. If that intrigues you, go watch them. It lies underneath a lot of what I'm talking about here. The reality is, and this is backed just by common evidence, we can't do it all alone and win. Now, I know somebody was going to say before I finish that sentence, of course I do, and look at behind me. Yeah, that's stuff that I've really effectively done all on my own. So you can say, oh, but you don't follow your year. There's reasons which we'll discuss later. And besides, there are plenty of times where I have worked with others. And I wish I could work more with others. I recently just had a mix that I did for another act released, Pacific Deep. There'll be I'll pop a picture up. It's over on Bandcamp. You can hear it. I did an alternate mix for a single EP launch thingy. That's bands working together. That's artists working together to develop and deliver more than they would alone. So we can't do it all alone and win. We'll come back after a little break here. A message from our sponsor, which is actually you. I do all of this off my own back. I don't get paid a cent for it until people actually support me. The way that I would most love for people to support me is by actually reaching out and saying, hey, Benedict, I want to work with you. Yes, that will be collaborations, but primarily, obviously, seeing I need to make a living, I need to put carrots on the table to feed the children, then that means actually hired work. For those of you who go, oh, well, I can't afford anybody, well, what's your commitment? I will also obviously accept donations over at Ko-fi, coffee, however you pronounce it, up to you what you provide there. But obviously, bear in mind, there's a lot of time that goes into this, but more importantly, there's an awful lot of experience that goes into it. It's 30 years of experience that goes into this. So please, support me, because where you invest and support others when you start to invest and support yourself. Alrighty, all of this is based around what I mentioned before, the 4 pillars of success. I tried to boil these down as much as possible, borrowing quite openly from some of the early rah-rah guys is what I refer to them, the successnik type people, secrets of highly effective people, jig jiggler bag, all that kind of stuff. Those guys, the sales guys, I got used to them because my brother was listening to their sales tapes. He'd hop in the car in his little Fiat X19 and we'd be listening to Zig Ziglar go on and on. Initially I was a bit like, or whatever, but then I started to realize that there really was an awful lot of sense in what they were talking about. They are very modern philosophers with a focus on sales. So taking that understanding, my own understanding of how things work in the music and having been a successful salesman, I said, okay, what do we boil this down to? For an indie act, what are the 4 main things that they need before they can really consider having success? As in, they will get no serious success or lasting success without these 4 things. So the first is artist development. If an act doesn't have a clear identity, nobody can actually choose them. I can talk about Culture Club and Boy George, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Whether you know much about him or not, you know what I'm talking about. Boy George and Culture Club, Boy George in particular, had a very powerful artist identity. Madonna, very, very powerful artist identity. Matter of fact, Madonna's artist identity really in many ways outstripped her artist ability. But that's fine, that's the Madonna experience, and good on her for that. So the first pillar is we have to have a clear sense of who we are. I've written so much about that, there's a whole free course on my website that if you actually work through, and the reality is you will quickly work out is that nobody does, which means they're not committed to their craft, sad, then you can really start to have something worth selling, something that somebody wants to buy. Number 2 is we have to have a backline, and backline is the core of what we're talking about here. You can't make it on your own and win. You can stand on a street corner and shout about the apocalypse, which is essentially what I do in these videos because I don't have enough supporters clapping and spreading what I do. Obviously, I'd love for people to do that, but for some reason they don't because they've swallowed the whole DIY, meaning DOA, do it all alone. So the thing here is you've got to have people that you work with. You can't do it all on your own. Those people that you work with go from band members. If you're a drummer, you probably need a guitarist and a bass player and a singer. Without them, it's very hard to be in a band. Yes, some Weisenheimer is going to say, oh, but you get Reaper Man, and then you get this plugin and that plugin, and then you can, pretend you have a band. Yeah, remember, we're aiming to actually have success. And while you can point to 1 or 2 people who say they do all of this alone, chances are you will find that they're Pinocchio nosing. Perfect example, which was all the rage a couple of years ago, was Billie Eilish. All that marketing about her and Phineas in their bedrooms, Pinocchio knows. There was a whole backline for them. Third one is location. I made a massive video on that, centering around not throwing your music away on Spotify, not signing their steaming contract. You've got to have a sense of where people will find you. Now, you can see that behind me, no, not the picture out there, in the sense that people can find me at Bandcamp. They can also find me on my own personal website and obviously in YouTube where you are right now. I am not everywhere. I have a couple of things on Spotify, and the only reason I haven't taken them down is because it's just not bloody worth it. Plus, it's a little intriguing to see how pathetic the numbers are. So I encourage anybody to find me there at all. I never say anything about it. But I do encourage people towards my Bandcamp and my personal website. That's my location. That's where I'm to be found. I do cover the but nobody's going to find you there thing on that video. Go watch that. Don't ask me here without having watched that, and then ask the question over there. And then finally, obviously, we have to build fans. Most people, unfortunately, do it the opposite way around. They go, oh, well, I'll go straight from having no idea what I'm doing, even though I pretend I do, to building fans. And then out of that, I will splatter myself all over the world, which will make fans for me. And then I'll get famous enough to have people who are going to wipe the spit out of my microphone. as in the backline will, once you build it, they will come. And while that will happen to some extent, obviously the more famous Elvis got, the more people were sniffing around trying to help Elvis and make a buck off the guy. But the reality here is that as an indie, we do have to manage a lot of this stuff ourselves, but we can't manage it all. We can't manage it all, which means that we have to specialize. As I mentioned earlier, Nashville became masters of specializing, even to an excessive extent, and the main record labels work this way as well. I've spoken about that elsewhere, where they have a wallet system, where random people who write and do bits and pieces of things, beat makers and what have you, they get an idea as far as they can take it, they put it into a wallet. That wallet is managed by, I'm assuming, some kind of A&R guy, but these days it's probably increasingly some kind of AI spider. But it's managed by a spider. And it will take things in the wallet and go, I wonder if we handed that over to this person. Whether it does that with any intelligence, or whether it just automatically farms it out. So if I were in the system, I would have my wallet where I put my things, and then be an in tray inside my wallet saying, here, what could you do with this? And so I'd have some fragments of other people's things, and I would say, here's what I would do to that, pop it back in the wallet, and after 23 iterations, we have a new Beyonce song. That's how they get to, all these modern songs get to have so many writer credits, because there's no one writer. It's not like James Taylor sitting there at his kitchen with a bottle of wine and a cup of coffee and a pen and paper writing a song, and then someone else coming along. Jackson Browne wanders in the back and says, "Here, this probably would work for guitar," and then Carole King comes in and goes, "Oh, how about this for piano?" It doesn't work that way anymore, because that has it together, working as a team. It's all very splintered. Again, that's still specializing. So by the time you listen to Beyonce's record, it's actually a result of a whole pile of specialists. Specialization is backline in action. So when you go to make your record, rather than you going, I'm going to do everything and fail at everything that I'm not perfect at, meaning I'm going to sink my own battleship, you go, okay, I'm going to focus on the bit that I'm really good at, and then bring in people to be better than me at all the things that I'm not excellent at. I could end the video here. That's self-evident. That's what we should do. Work for Henry Ford. But people are going to want more. So if you have a talent, let's say guitar is your talent. It sure ain't mine. But let's say guitar is your talent. You are a really good guitarinator. Let's say your name is Steve Stevens. You got fabulous hair and you look like a Robert Smith clone. Steve Stevens really hasn't gone anywhere on his own. I seem to recall there was a solo record, maybe a couple of them, but I don't know that anybody bought it. I don't recall any of it myself. So Steve Stevens, as Steve Stevens, has obviously been a bit of a nobody. But for anybody who knows anything about proper rock and roll, Billy Idol. Steve Stevens being Billy Idol's guitarist, and we love to see the two of them together because they work together so well. Now, Steve Stevens is actually a really good guitarist, a good songwriter / developer. The work that he's done with Billy obviously is amazing, and of course that was done largely with Keith Forsey as well, who was ex-Giorgio Moroder. So the thing is, we should focus on what we're good at. Now, Billy Idol can actually do more things than we get the impression. But Billy Idol focuses on being the Billy Idol that we know, because that's what he's best at, which allows Steve Stevens to focus on strumming, and whoever they've got playing drums to drum, and whoever they've got playing bass to bass, and on Catch My Fall, Mars Williams to saxophone. We must specialise. Otherwise, what happens is we start to, as I said before, focus on doing a bad job. And we try to fool ourselves that it'll be good enough, or that our amazefulness as our one thing will be enough to get us there, but it won't. You see these records from people who do have talent, but they've worked with either very poor quality talent or no talent whatsoever. Worse, they've just DIY'd it themselves, or band in a box, or easy this, that, and the other, easy drummer or what have you. And it's a dead record. That's not to say you couldn't make cool things with Easy Drummer, but the problem is the doing that stuff is not in the forte of our guitarist person, because they're a guitarist person. So you've got to specialize, and you should only specialize in doing 1 or 2 things, no more. By the time you find yourself doing more than 2 things, chances are you've watered yourself down and you're now doing a bad job and sinking your battleship. Remember that DIY really meaning do only alone. DOA. We know what that means. Dead on arrival. Do only alone. I've got an image that I saw a while ago and I actually stored. Wasn't sure why, and it came perfect for this. It's about a rodeo count. It's like, oh, you expect me to be able to do all this stuff. I don't have high enough a rodeo count. As in, this isn't my first rodeo, but it's my second rodeo, and I'm supposed to be excellent at absolutely everything. It's pretty stupid. We can only fail this way. So let's look at some of the specialties that we should be having in our process. Obviously, we need a songwriter. If we are singing, then we need a lyricist. Maybe that's you. We need a composer, songwriter of music. Okay, maybe that's you as well. But the reality is, chances are you don't know how to write all the instrument parts. You may be able to put together the chords, you may be able to come up with your vocal melody. But can you flesh that out? Are you an arranger or an orchestrator? Often within arrangers, you actually have genre specialists. So if we wanted disco, we didn't go to Sir George Martin. If we wanted disco, we went to Michael Masser or people like that, the guys that Michael Jackson worked with. And George Benson, to some extent, worked with a lot of the same guys. We have specialists. You find those specialists, but not by going, I only want such and such a subgenre. That's really, really narrow-minded. That's not specialization. That's just kind of stupidity. But people will have strengths in a certain style and a certain feel. So obviously you check their record. Check your record, check your record, check the guy's track record. Sorry, I can't remember where that comes from. So you need an arranger to make sure that your song flows and that all the parts within the song flow, to stop you from crashing in verse into chorus and you think it's good enough, probably because you're focusing on singing, but in reality, when it's on the radio, it's just going to be like, yeah, that crashed, that was broken. You obviously then need players. Now, the amazing thing is that there are people out there who are very famous for playing an instrument. I mentioned George Benson, really wonderful guitarist, but there are plenty of George Benson records where there's very little George Benson guitarring. Simply because he allowed other people who were better at what needed to be done to play those parts than him, and he played the bits that he was good at and sang. Despite being a truly wonderful guitarist, he was obviously most famous for being a singer by the end. So you need players. If you are not the greatest guitarist, then find a guitarist who's better than you. If you're offended by the idea of someone being better than you, then leave this business. Go into a business where it's just about competition. I mean, a death match or something like that. Become a gladiator. It's you against everybody else. The reality here is you need to work as part of a team. So if your song can be better sold with a different guitarist, a better guitarist, then get the better guitarist, because your song will be better. It'll have your name on it, or you'll be getting paid for it, whether your name's on it or not. Same with a bass player, same with drums. Just going, I'll just use some presets in Logic Drummer or an Easy Drummer. That's probably not getting you there. It's probably undoing what you've done. Rock bands started to replace their drums with drum machines, thinking, it was cool. But the problem was, by that time, the people who were running the drum machines just technically knew how to start them and press some patterns. They didn't know how to make them fire. The other thing that's commonly in a recording session, and way before the recordings are made, is a record producer. Record producer now has been taken to mean beat maker. It's not. I never talk about it in that way, or if I do, I spell it Produca, as in those beat maker-y types. They're not record producers. I don't want to get into that argument. I am simply differentiating because they're very different roles. A real record producer, Sir George Martin and Alan Parsons, that's what I'm talking about. A Mutt Lange even, or Rick Rubin. Get a haircut and a pair of trousers and some shoes, goddamn you. The guy is great. These are the people who sit back and they look at the whole process. What do we need to get these songs delivered? There are a lot of stories around Rick Rubin of him dealing with particular artists and helping them get their thing done, often in reasonably unconventional ways, in the sense that he's not a technical guy, he's a picture guy, just like me, I assume. I've never met him. And then, of course, when you go into your studio, you need a recording engineer, because if you're trying to play guitar and be a recording engineer, while it's possible, especially if you're just doing it in front of your door, and yeah, I do it myself, not with a guitar, of course. I've done it with other people's guitars. Then the recording engineer helps keep things in focus. So one of the great advantages of having a recording engineer when we're working on DAW, let's say it's the band recording themselves, which I'm not opposed to, they need to have really a recording engineer. Now, even if the band themselves, let's say it's the bass player, because they seem most likely to do this, has said, oh, well, I'm going to own Reaper or steal it, and some plugins, and I'm going to be the recording guy. When the bass player is putting all his time and attention into the technicalities of running Reaper, I made a review for Higher Hertz if you want to see what I think of Reaper. I think it's incredibly capable, but oh my God, how unmusical. The thing is, that changes the bass player's mindset. Where a band should go into the studio wanting all of the musicians to be focused on the music and the story and the art, you've suddenly got one of your members who's focused on a whole lot of other technicalities, which at times can seem contrary to the art process. Now, by rights, the record producer should help bridge that. But the reality is, with a band that's decided they're going to record themselves, they would be far smarter if they don't have a record producer who can step in and do the at least technical stuff of pressing play and what have you, and focusing on the technical machine. Then they don't really want to have the bass player doing this, because the bass player is suddenly going to be thinking about a whole lot of stuff. His focus has gone from being a bass player to being a recording engineer. But the problem there is that he's probably not experienced as a recording engineer, not as a real one. A real recording engineer is thinking big picture the whole time and just checking, is what I'm doing here, is what the band doing here going to work for the big picture? Whereas when the bass player's doing it, what's happening, he's just completely, his whole world is narrowed down to this. So you end up with takes that aren't going to work, but they're taken and they're like, oh yeah, great mate, that'll do. And by the time it goes off to mixing, which is sadly probably going to be their bass player again, then it's broken and it won't work. So specialties, really important. Editing, I'm not a big fan of editing, but I know many of you are going to do it. Don't use the same bass player. Get somebody who's a specialist in editing. Simply moving in everything and jamming it into the grid is probably going to do more damage than good. I looked at a job yesterday where a band who said they played with a very famous proto-punk band back in the day were going through their back catalogue and bringing things up for a record release of this old material. And they were actually busy murdering their history. They were actually updating their history. So where if I download or go out and buy a record and it's got, I just don't want to mention the band name because you could work it out, and it comes with a live at, let's say, Fillmore, because that's not what I'm thinking of, then when you put on that second disc, it's going to sound like 1972. And that's appropriate. If when rejiggering that to get it from the old tape from the 70s to a CD, or however they're selling it to you, but let's say a CD, the band went in and did a whole lot of changes and even hired in other personnel, like randoms, and said, oh, we don't really like this bass line. Our bass player was always out of time. Here, can you play a proper, better bass line? Well, you might go, oh, but that's done. Not if you actually want it to feel authentic. Because by the time you've got somebody else playing a bass line, it's not 1972. Not only is it not that band, but it's not 1972. If I went and saw the Pistols in 1979 and Sid was up on stage cutting himself and not playing bass, then the recording would actually have the lack of sinfulness, or the fact that somebody else was off the side playing bass, or whatever they did at those moments. That is the performance. If I'm interested enough to watch that, I want to hear what really happened, and I want to feel like I'm being transported to there. So with editing, take extreme care that you don't damage your material. This band were hell-bent on damaging their material, and then they'd wonder why there was very limited interest. It was probably hard to get interest in the first place because they weren't a known name. But the thing is, people who are interested, particularly in the band name they were saying that they played with, then they'd come over and have a quick listen. And if it feels like, oh, this is consistent with, band X, then they might give them more time because it reminds them of the heydays of that time. Whereas in reality, they're going to hear this and go, this sounds weird. I listened to one of the tracks they'd already had done, and straight away from the applause, I think it was probably real applause, but the problem was that some doofus has used so much ozone or whatever, isotope something or other, so it sounded like the applause was like some kind of digital bit crushed thing. It didn't sound like applause. It sounded wrong, but whoever had done it had thought, oh, well, that makes it cleaner and better. Yeah, but it doesn't sound like 1978 anymore. It sounds like 2020. So if I get this record based on it being a performance from 1978 and it sounds like 2020, how am I going to be interested? Not at all. So take editing carefully. Mix engineer, you need a mix engineer. As I've said, you don't want your bass player focusing on mixing, because the problem there is going to be if that they're not actually a mix engineer first, then they're probably going to brutalize your record. And you'll wonder why it doesn't really work out right. The emphasis on everything will be wrong. You need a mix engineer because a mix engineer is an artist in their own right. If you wanted to start a heavy metal band, who would you first want to hire? Eddie Van Halen, Malmsteen, guy from Slayer, whatever. You'd have your target of this is the goat. I hate that term. The thing there then is, would you go out of your way to hire the worst guitarist you could find? I would assume you'd say no, but then that's exactly what happens. People go out, and with the supporting material, they go out and hire often the worst people they can find, normally by trying to avoid hiring somebody. But if you say, or allow your bass player to say, oh, but I've got Reaper and so many plugins, and therefore I'm skilled at this, you're actually hiring that guy. If the guy has a track record of making great records, if his name's Trevor Horn, by all means, give him a go. But if he has no track record, or you listen to the stuff that he's done before and you're like, this doesn't sound like Slayer, this doesn't sound like the Bay City Rollers trying to cover Slayer, doesn't sound like a cover band of Slayer trying to play the Bay City Rollers, this just sounds broken and lame and amateurish in a bad way. As in, these guys clearly don't love what they do, they're not committed to it, they're just, well, not even chances. Then why are you hiring this guy? So you're probably then going to need a mastering engineer. If you've got a really good mix engineer, they can probably do what's necessary as long as it's not going to vinyl. If it's going to vinyl, you need a vinyl mastering engineer, nothing else. But a good mix engineer can do it, or you might just say, look, I want the third set of ears of a mastering engineer. You'll then need a marketing team. That means you're going to need artwork. You can see my cover art here. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It at least resembles cover art. It says this is an album cover. There are so many indie acts who put out things that don't have the basics. You're possibly going to need to consider adverts. Now, if not actually paid adverts, then you're going to need to consider, well, how do I get this in front of potential fans? Obviously, if you're a grassroots indie, then the first place you want to be is in groups and forums. I would put my head down and go and search Faceplace for some goth groups, say. Hang out there, learn who's who, learn what's what, learn what they like, and then when a first song becomes available, just start to say, oh, I've got this. That's advertising. It takes more effort than simply blowing $50, but you'll get a better result given time, so long as you've chosen the right places. And I must admit that's increasingly difficult. But you've also got to make sure that you're not just pitching to other wannabe musicians, because they will do their level best to sink you. When you release something that's better than what they can do, they will say mean shit. Again, go watch the Dorville Toxic Religious Cult video. And most importantly, you're going to need a strategy, which takes us right back to pillar number 1, artist development. Who are you? If you can't really answer that, then you've got a slight problem, which means you've got nothing. And then you should go out on the road, if at all possible, because people still key into somebody standing on the stage strumming a guitar, even if they're pretty bad at it. They key into that far more than some nameless, faceless person on the interwebs. Yeah, I don't put my face on my record covers, and I've thought about it quite a few times, and I just somehow never really feel like I've come up with a solution to it. But at least on my website, on my Bandcamp, there is a face, there is an identity, and because I do all my own cover art, for right or for wrong, I believe there's a sense of consistency within my cover art, that they have a Benedict feel because, well, Benedict did it. Could I get better artwork? Oh, hell yeah. But there is a definite reason why I do not use AI, because suddenly it doesn't feel like Benedict. It doesn't feel like anybody. It just feels like some wannabe wacko who's used the laziest, stupidest, weirdest possible method of doing it, and not in a cool way. I'm not talking about like a Weezer record or something like that. But you will need road crew, people who carry your shit. And they are the most common specialties that you will find, apart from A&R guys, accountants, managers, those sorts of things. But they come a little bit later, generally not so early in the chain. They are your backline. If you don't have all of those roles covered very directly and with good people, then you're letting yourself down and you're making sure that your record comes out worse than it should. So work on your backline. Remember, while Dorville says, you DIY, you do it all yourself, kind of trying to hark back to punk, it's not the same as punk. Punk was where the band got together and said, it's us against the world. Dorville says the world is against you and you're going to have to do everything completely on your own. It will do everything it can to separate you from everybody. And in result, what it's really saying is do it only alone. And that's not a good thing, because we all know that DOA is actually dead on arrival. You make records that are dead. And it's always hard for indie acts making early records to actually feel like they represent what they've been doing. It's not our live sound, man. It just doesn't sound as good as us live. And they'd be disappointed with their record, partly because they spent too little, partly because they didn't take in a record producer and they'd go to wrong studios, but in part simply because they didn't have any understanding of the process. Whereas if they'd brought in people who understood the process and taken a bit more time and money, put in back in those days where you spent $500 and could get an EP, if they'd spent $750, they could have got an EP that was significantly better, because they'd have a record producer on board, and possibly the record producer would be mixing the record as well. What that cost would be, I don't know now. As a mix engineer, I price jobs once I understand what the jobs are. The reality is most people are too silly to actually tell me what the job is. Possibly because when they see $150 for a basic mix, they go, but I thought I could do this for $15. Okay, would you buy a car for $15? And most of you go, fuck no. Anything under, depending upon where you live, but in Australia, anything under about 10 grand at a car yard, a used car yard, is going to be what's called a shitter. As in other words, it's going to shit itself within months of your getting it. So the reality is there's a certain amount you need to spend, and below that you're not going to get anything worth having. So if you don't invest in yourselves, and bands, when they were spending $500 on a single or an EP, everybody put something in. But now, because there's no everybody, nobody's prepared to commit anything to anything. And yet at the same time, people will sink hundreds of dollars into gear so that I can be more technically better, not realizing that that gear is not going to make a better record. So how do we manage this in the modern world? Because people go, oh, but Benedict, you're talking about the 80s, and that's not how it is now. It's like, well, firstly, it's a little bit screw you, because, you know, I'm saying this right now. I could date stamp this, and it would be like, you know, now, 2024, mid-February, it's Valentine's Day on Wednesday. So it's now. It's as much now as you are. And I have to deal with all this stuff. I've been talking about Dorville. That's a now thing. That's in the last 20, 25 years. Dorville has really taken over. So how do we do it in the modern world? Well, I admit it is harder. A, because it is more difficult to get some mileage, but a lot of that's because people are doing it just so completely arse about. They're doing it so completely wrong. They're doing it only alone. Therefore, DOA from the right at the beginning. They have no artist development. They haven't thought about who we really are as an act. They might think they do. They might think, oh, we like Slayer's 47th record, so we're going to sound like Slayer's 47th record. They might even be wise enough to call themselves Slayer's 47th record. But the moment they stop being a tribute band, as in playing Slayer's 47th record, then they have no fan base whatsoever. Some of their own buddies might tell them how great they are, but the reality is their buddies aren't buying their record. They can't even sell their record if it's actually literally Slayer's 47th record, assuming Slayer made 47 records. I don't believe they did. Let's not get technical, boys and girls. So in the modern world, it is a little more difficult, but largely that's because a lot of the people who are trying to think that they should make it aren't necessarily destined to make it, or, as I keep saying, are doing everything they can to scupper themselves because they've got no artist development, absolutely no backline. They haven't even thought amongst themselves as to the different sections that would normally be handled. Most of them haven't even done the research to understand how it was done. And many of them go, oh, but that's irrelevant. And it's like, well, this is when great records were made. This is how it was when Marvin Gaye made a record. This is how it was when Michael Jackson made Thriller. Thriller sold more copies than just about anything else. And it was made with a massive backline of people. People got to look at their location. And most people say, oh, my location will be splattered everywhere across Spotify. That's not a location. It's not like CBGB's or the 100 Club. It's not even your local Return Soldiers League. It's not your local bowls club. It's not anything. You're not unique. So you've got to get out there, build that, and then you've got to engage and actually build fans. Most people don't want to build fans. They're like, oh, but that takes time and effort, man. They should just come to me because I'm so amazeballs. What? Amazingly arrogant, amazingly stupid, amazingly determined to scupper their supposed passionate career. And I know people don't like hearing this, but this is the problem in the modern world. People don't want to do the work. If you don't do the work, you can't get the results. If you don't learn to drive, then you can move a car around, but it's only a matter of time before you have some serious problems. You crash. And like a lot of young people, if you think you can drive way better than you are, you probably crash and burn. This is not a good outcome, apparently. So in the modern world, it is harder. Building relationships is a lot more difficult. People are very determined to do only alone. They think that somehow it's the mark of merit. Probably because there are so many what I refer to as gamers out there. And I've got nothing against gamers, but gamers who make the mistake of thinking that because they've played every instance of Games of Gore, that they really are a Navy SEAL and go invade Atabakistan. They don't last very long. They get shot by the first AK-47 they encounter, because playing Gears of Gore and actually invading Atabakistan are very, very different things. They're not the same outcome. They're not the same process even though in both you're walking around like this. So we need to understand that there is a difference. But we've got to build Backline and we've got to talk and work with people. So having this DIY or do only alone ethos means that we actually work against ourselves. We should be engaging other people. But the problem that we face is when you go into where you might meet other people, they tend to be so busily doing the I do this only alone and giving a million reasons, I can't afford to work with somebody else. Well, what if I offered to mix your track for free, sir? Absolutely for free. No, I can't afford that. What, you can't afford $0, sir? No, you don't know what you're talking about. Okay. If I offered to mix your track for no dollars up front, I just insisted that you put my name on the song and also link it. You know, in theory, you should be promoting your song when you're done. So when you put it on YouTube, it will say song by Sid Snort, mixing by Benedict Roff-Marsh, and link off to benedictroffmarsh.com. That's the only costs, really. And that when you generally talk, you mention me as an integral part of the backline of this because you got it for free, so that's how you return value. When your friend's saying, hey, Sid, I got a song and I want to put out. And Sid goes, yeah, mate, that Benedict guy done a good one for me. Why don't you go see him? That's the cost. That's not dollar cost. But for some reason, people don't want to do any of that basic stuff. They're also do it only alone, that they kill themselves and their projects before they get anywhere. So engaging with people is very, very difficult because, as I said, when you go into these groups and forums, people are too busy trying to shoot each other in the face to prove how more pro they are, which only proves how they really are. But it's not a system that's willing to change because everybody thinks that if they can prove then they will somehow become more profile. But success doesn't come that way. The reality is that while rock stars on stage seem like the toughest, coolest, meanest cats out there, in reality, they're commonly not. They're showmen. They're actors. Chances are Billy Idol is not that mean a guy. Chances are, once you strip away all the layers of Billy Idolness, you probably end up with a really sensitive fellow. Sorry, Billy, if I outed you, but this is the way the world works. People who can do amazing sensitive things, even if under a layer of... they're sensitive people. So working together allows us to build that. But this whole do only alone, dead on arrival routine makes it hard. So how do we get past that? I wish I had an answer. I really do. But all I can say is still be out there in groups and forums. I'm not anymore because I'd had enough of it. But I have far less patience now than I did when I was younger. But I'm still here. I'm still posting this stuff, asking, hey, I'm open to working with people, whether it's collaborations, whether it's for hire, all that stuff. I'm still here. I haven't removed any of my shingle, any of my ability to get things done, to help people get their jobs done. The fact that people don't ask, or where on places like Air Gigs I put expressions of interest in jobs that people want done, the fact that they don't answer me, that they ghost, that's on them, not me. I put myself forward. If they don't have the plain basic manners to say thanks for your inquiry, but this, or here's the information that you requested, this is what I'm hoping to achieve, or yeah, look, I see that 150 was your base price. I think that was a little outside of my budget. I was thinking to spend this. Whatever, engagement. But if people won't engage, that's not my fault. All I can do is still present myself. So continue to present yourself, but do the work so that you present something that is unique and stands out. When you find people who you can work with, then stick with them. Don't burn them. The biggest problem these days, as you should be able to work out, is that most people are too quick to burn somebody. They're commonly burning them before you've even had the opportunity to work together. That burns my hole because we're destroying opportunities. Some bands pretty well all hated each other the whole time. The Clash apparently hated each other all the time. But The Clash, Yazoo, or in America, Yaz, Vince Clarke and Alison Moyet apparently didn't really like each other. Vince was not chuffed to be handed this lady to work with after he'd left Depeche Mode. But the amazing thing was that they made a couple of great records. The first record's a really good record, but the second record, You and Me Both, it's a perfect record. They split up after that, but you know what? Perfect record. Vince and Alison made a record that most people would be dying to make a record that good, and they had genuine hits out of it and would made money. So the thing is, it's not about you having to like people as your best buddy. It's about saying, can we do great work together? And if you can do great work together, it's not about it's about this. And that if I were Vince or Alison and I had participated and put down my half of You and Me Both, it'd be like, that's an event of a lifetime. Maybe that's why there was no third record. Maybe there was this fear in one or both of them. They couldn't top that record. I understand that. The thing is, look at things differently. It's not about your ego, it's about the songs. If you've got these songs, these stories that you want told, you want put into a scene and the story told, and for it to be magical, vibrant, not clones of Slayer's 47th album or whatever, then find people who are as committed to those songs as you are. And then just work with them and stay with them and support them, back them. If you don't back them, if you don't make a point of saying thanks, if you don't make a point of putting their link on things when you show the work, they're probably not going to give you anything next time, especially if you paid them less than full going rates. If you've paid somebody full going rates, you're even still supposed to put their thing on it. This is just how it should be. So you can still do it these days. You've just got to offer what's appropriate, but also to protect yourself, not by being an asshole first. Just be aware, are there red flags? In starting to talk to somebody, if they come to me going, oh, well, you know, you need to do this, a sample of this mix for free because you need to prove that you're going to win Grammy records with my song that I sung whilst I was sitting on the toilet taking a dump, then there's so many red flags all over that one that I'm just going to be like, I am going to reply, but it's going to be, sorry, I'm not the cat for you. Best of luck with that, dude. To watch your red flags, have a look at the track record. Check the record, check the guy's track record. Because if the guy's track record is full of use and abuse, he's going to use and abuse you. True professionals don't tolerate that kind of behaviour simply because they're not getting paid properly. We all want to see our credits on the work because that's how we get more work. So the thing is, you've got to pay people properly, and that means engaging with them and always keeping them as part of your family. They're part of your team, and if you treat them like they're not part of your team, when it comes around to next time, they won't be part of your team. So protect yourself, firstly by hiring the right people, hiring people who are better than you. If you're offended by them being better than you, get out of this business, become a gladiator, because it's you and everybody else against each other. See how long you last. Don't come crying when you've got cut up. Protect your backline. Build it and protect it. Hire people that are better than you to do the things that you are not so good at doing. If you hire me to be a mix engineer, I'm not going to play guitar on your record. Unless you ask for the world's weirdest guitarist who can't even play a chord. If that's a strategic decision and we agree that this is a good strategy for your record, by all means, I will guest and I'll expect a credit. Benedict Roff-Marsh played guitar on track 13, and it'll probably be a bit cool in its own really wrong way. Hire people better than you, back them, support them. Keep your eye out for red flags, which is not that, oh, do I like this person? Do they match my hipster bushy beard? All that kind of hipster garbage. No, that's just you shooting yourself in the foot. But watch out for genuine red flags. Do they use and abuse people? Do they never return value? Do they never pay properly? Do they start the conversation with a, what's your best price, mate? In which case it's like, sorry, I'm a bit too busy. best of luck with it. I'd suggest you go see Fiverr. There'll be some idiot who'll do it for $15. It will be atrocious, but you'll probably be stupid enough to think that it's good and you'll die with it. And then you'll be complaining that mix engineers are shit. But guess who's shit? Dude. So you've just got to take your time, but being serious in your strategy. If you don't have an actual strategy, then none of this is going to make any sense, and you're just going to go do the usual, do it only alone, and die on arrival. Again, I'd ask for your support. Either hire me, consider a collaboration, but you're going to need to show what I'm going to get in return. Otherwise, go to coffee. I have put a lot of value into this conversation, even if it may seem circular, but this is a discussion, it's a talk. Return some value there, because that helps make a big difference. Otherwise, you've got my contacts down below for my website, my coffee. Get out there, think differently, do different.